Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar that will review the Reduction of Lead in Drinking Water Act, answer your questions, and offer suggestions on how distributors can comply with the legislation, as well as understand how it will impact your customers. Please note that this one-hour webinar is being recorded for replay. Everyone registered for this webinar will receive a follow-up email message in the next 48 to 72 hours with notification as to when the replay is available, as well as instructions on how to access it and the presentation slides. I'm Chris Murin, Executive Director of ASA, and before we get underway, I'd like to be sure we recognize our 2013 supplier partners who are truly dedicated to the positive development of the PHCP and industrial mechanical PVF industry through ASA. When making key decisions in your business, please consider these corporate partners that go above and beyond with their support to advance the association's efforts, programs, and services through advocacy, education, networking, and business intelligence. One of the association's strategic goals is that ASA will be the recognized voice of the PHCP and industrial mechanical PVF industry, and its members for legislative initiatives, regulatory compliance, workforce advancement, political intelligence, and employee safety in the workplace. Since 2010, Dan Hilton has been a member of the ASA staff representing your interests on Capitol Hill as Director of Government Affairs. Every day, Dan works on your behalf to keep open the doors and lines of communication, meeting with members of Congress and their staffs, collaborates with the appropriate and necessary stakeholders on key issues, including the Get the Lead Out Consortium, and reaches out to our members directly as needed with his communications and individual contact. It's now my pleasure to introduce our presenter and an all-around good guy, John Kirkland, Vice President of Sales for Legend Valve. John will present this morning's webinar on behalf of the Get the Lead Out Consortium, a team of industry professionals who are actively promoting outreach in the form of training and marketing initiatives to help the industry transition and comply with the lead-free legislation, including interpretation, manufacturing issues, and installation. John will also be sure to review key differences between federal and state no-lead mandates, as well as language to be added to Section 1417 of the Safe Drinking Water Act. He'll also share his perspective on standards and codes, no-lead alloys and soldering materials, product identification, and enforcement. Now, before I turn it over to John, I want to make sure that everyone is clear he or she is encouraged to ask questions throughout this presentation. While it would be very difficult to have all of us on a conference call, your go-to webinar control panel includes window panes in which you may pose questions and even chat with other participants through the use of your computer's keyboard. I'll help John to monitor the control panel for your questions, and periodically he'll be asking us if we have any for him. By the way, you can minimize and maximize the go-to webinar control panel by clicking on the orange arrow in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. John, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. I just want to welcome everybody for the Get the Lead Out Plumbing training program. Appreciate your time. One correction here, we're going to keep this roughly in the 30 to 35-minute window. And all of you should be seeing currently up on your screens the consortium partners. We're not going to call each of these out by name, but only to mention that each of them have had an active part or role in the development of the presentation. It's important for you to know that the website, gettheleadoutplumbing.com, is available, and it carries much of the information that we're going to cover today, in addition to this presentation, which is available for download, as well as up-and-coming training activities that will occur around the country today, whether it be through sponsorship of ASA, the PHCC, or for ASPE. There are a number of meetings. Please check the schedule for available dates in your specific area. Before we begin, the presentation was developed by members of the Get the Lead Out Plumbing Consortium to provide education to industry stakeholders to promote understanding and compliance with the Reduction of Lead in Drinking Water Act, which goes into effect on January 2014. The presentation is for information purposes only and is not intended to be legal advice. Should any party need legal advice regarding the information contained herein, they should contact their own counsel who specializes in the area of law. The consortium will not enter into any discussions related to product, material selection, distribution, or pricing of lead-free plumbing products in accordance with the established antitrust guidelines. A brief overview of what we're going to cover during this webinar First will be the law and its background, and there are certainly a lot of questions in that area. We welcome those throughout the presentation. Interpretation issues relevant to the law, manufacturing issues surrounding the development of the new lead-free products, installation considerations for properly installing new lead-free products, and preparing for the implementation of this law. The Federal Lead-Free Law, the Reduction of Drinking Water Act. The timeline, as many of you know, this was signed into law on January 4th, 2011. The implementation date is now less than a year away, which is January 4th, 2014. Two critical areas here that the law amends the previous Safe Drinking Water Act is the following. The amended definition of lead-free is provided. It's important to understand that there are two here that we need to be specific with. One would be solder and flux. The other would be the max weighted average for other products. For example, a 0.20% max lead for solder and flux, where the balance would be 0.25% max lead for products by weighted average. To provide further clarity, when we use the words or the verbiage of weighted average, I want to explain that to you. This is multiple component products that are calculated to address the total wetted exposure based upon the wetted surface area of each component in the component's lead content by percentage. To sum this up, it is the wetted surface or the surface area of the valve or the fitting that comes directly in contact with the water as it passes through. A lot of interpretation is being made out in the field. I think that much of this will be cleared up when it comes to exemptions of federal lead-free law as we move through the presentation. Much of it may not be cleared up till the balance or the end of this year. But here currently are the exemptions as they are identified. Pipes, pipe fittings, plumbing fittings, or fixtures including backflow preventers that are used exclusively for non-potable surfaces such as manufacturing, industrial processing, irrigation, outdoor watering, or any other uses where the water is not anticipated, that's a key word, anticipated to be used for human consumption. If you were to highlight or pull away, take anything away from this particular slide, it would be anticipated or used for human consumption. That is the interpretation that you're going to have to work with because there is no finite listing outside of a 1 1/4 page document that our government's made available to us. Part 2 of this is toilets, bidets, urinals, fill valves, flush meter valves, tub fillers, shower valves, service saddles, or water distribution main gate valves that are 2 inches in diameter or larger. Part 1 and Part 2. Much of this has led to a lot of questions as it relates to whether the valve or the fitting has an IPS or a solder connection, if it has a garden hose connection. Under no way, shape, or form are there any threading of any type spelled out in the law. So interpretation should be this, and that's exactly what it is, interpretation. Anticipated for use, to be used for human consumption. That is the critical key takeaway from this particular slide. Key differences between state and federal laws. California, Vermont, Maryland, Louisiana. Applies to any product intended to convey or dispense water for human consumption through drinking or cooking. Again, the key word here is human consumption, which is becoming a commonplace amongst the definitions that we're talking about. Federal applies to any product used in systems where water is anticipated to be used for human consumption. The federal law wording could be interpreted to cover a much broader group of products than state laws. And again, interpretation of this is key here because the one common line that's being used here is human consumption. Keep those as your key takeaways from this presentation. As it relates to NSF ANSI 61, I think each and every one of you are looking for what are the key certs that I'm going to have specific to the products I purchase that are being used for potable installation. NSF ANSI 61 would be as follows. There are 2 areas here that then are brought together under one roof, as I should say, which is NSF 61G. What is NSF 61G? It's a combination of NSF 61. NSF 61 evaluates all potential contaminants from drinking water products. These contaminants are established by the EPA. not NSF. NSF is testing for them. Over to your right is NSF 372, which evaluates the products for a weighted average lead content of less than 0.25%. Together, looking at any product you're currently marketing or selling under the compliant category, the listing you're going to look for would be NSF 61-G. And again, the presentation is available for download from the GetTheLeadOutPlumbing.com website. Third-party agencies are also certifying products and certifying to the NSF 61-G protocol. Here are a list of those companies. And why are we pointing them out? Because in many cases, the companies you're supporting, the vendors you're purchasing these products from, may not necessarily test with NSF. They could be using any one of the following for testing protocol that then would meet NSF. These are the ANSI accredited agencies that can provide certifications. Listings include these: NSF, Truesdale Labs, UL, WQA, IATMO, CSA, Intertech, and ICC Evaluation Service. Any one of those companies that were just listed can certify to NSF ANSI 61-G. Enforcement of the law. Before I move into this, I mean, many of you that you're dealing with dealing with the contractors, these are the types of questions they have. A lot of this is still being ironed out with further detail to follow later this year. But as it stands today, enforcement of the law would fall directly on the hands of the EPA. The EPA implements the law. As far as enforcement, that would then be left to the states, and most states then pass responsibility to counties, cities, towns, and municipal utilities, who use health and plumbing codes to drive enforcement. California is the exception. California requires product certification by a third party. Before I exit this slide, please understand that many of the code enforcement officials are being updated. Many of the trade associations are doing updating now. So don't be surprised if you engage with contractors, or for that matter, those that are doing the inspecting out in the field at the local level, that they're unaware of some of the detail associated with this. This is going to be a real challenging year with respect to the knowledge base that's being shared within the industry. I want to talk about manufacturing issues, and there's a lot to be gathered here. Much of it is not in these slides, but I think it's open for discussion, and I'd like to share some of the more finite detail that we as a valve manufacturer have had to deal with over the last 12 to 24 months. First, we're going to talk about lead-free bronze brass. These alloys are more difficult to cast. That leads to other issues or matters at hand that create challenges in the manufacturing process, such as harder to machine. This creates additional wear on the machine and tool, also impacts the ability to achieve previous manufacturing capacities because of the machining of these products not happening as readily. The production lines are not nearly as robust as they would be under a product that was made with a leaded or a non-compliant alloy. Harder to press. This would fall directly into the forging of a brass product. The forging presses, again, that is a more challenging aspect of what's happening with respect to lead-free brass and bronze. Keep in mind that the presses, when the alloy is being pressed, because the alloy is harder, it's more difficult to press, and in many cases, producing product that is marketable or saleable becomes that much more challenging, meaning that the defect rate for forging alloys has had a long way to go, and it's currently in a much better position due to some new alloys that are currently available to the industry. Fitting design accommodates increased hardness, same working pressures. This, in a nutshell, sizes it up. If I were to take this back one step to the very beginning here, the lead in the alloy provides the ease of machinability, and that is the real key here. The lead is the lubricant in the machining process, and for that matter, in the forging process that allows the product to be manufactured and conform to the sizes and shapes that a manufacturer would be manufacturing to. Alloy comparisons, standard bronze brass. It's a traditional plumbing material, stronger than copper, has minimal erosion and corrosion, and used for adapters and transitions. This product contains lead, whereas lead-free bronze brass, less than 0.25% lead. Lead's replaced with bismuth or silicon. It's a harder material. It has minimal erosion and corrosion. Over to your right in this slide, you'll see some of the testing equipment that's utilized to test the alloys to ensure that they conform with the no lead criteria. Types of lead-free solutions. There are copper-based alloys, which consist of silicone copper alloys, bismuth copper alloys, and many alloys available and more being developed. Naturally, engineered plastics and stainless steel would comply with the federal no lead mandate. Spend a moment on installation. So the installer, when we're talking about the install of a solder type valve, the installer must use only lead-free compliant solder, i.e. 95% tin and 5% antimony, or other listed lead-free solders. Again, this is different for solder than it would be for a valving or a piping system component. The maximum level of lead for solder is different than for pipe, fittings, and fixtures, which was covered earlier in the presentation. The secondary piece to this, as far as soldering a valve and pipe, would be plumbing codes require flux to meet the requirements of ASTM B813. As referred to by the industry, these are water flushable or soluble fluxes, which allow for, during the purging of a system, allow that flux to wash directly out and through the system or pass through. This would be the two criteria with respect to the soldering materials that one would have to have in place. I'm not going to go through the basic requirements for soldering. Many of the tradesmen will understand that, of course, clean joints and proper prep of a valve and a fitting is pretty much understood with respect to soldering. Areas that most have talked about have been the challenges associated with soldering a lead-free valve. Here are just some key pointers with respect to lead-free valve soldering in copper tube. Heating of the joint should be done gradually and not in excess. One point here to make is that the silver-bearing solders that exist today in the marketplace have a wider working range. So I believe they'll be a lot more in the way friendlier with respect to how they heat and how they react to temperature. You'll continually adjust the location of the flame and will provide an even heating to the joint and a uniform temperature for the solder to create the capillary effect. In the larger diameter valves and fittings, many of the contractors have noted that they've literally had to work the torch with the heat directly around the valve or fitting to create a direct draw where it's uniform, and they then have the capillary effect where the solder completely encompasses the joint. To discuss further the lead-free product identification examples, packaging, and body markings, this will in fact vary by manufacturer. As you'll note here that there are a lot of different ways the valving can be marked. Some could be something as little as symbols, where a given manufacturer has a symbol that represents no lead for them. You're seeing here that there are everything from check boxes to triangles to that are actually empty to solid triangles. But the more popular ways of noting the product would be either a PB, which is the symbol for lead, with a circle and a line through it, LF for lead-free, and on the bottom you'll see an NL listed there for no lead. Over to your right on the bottom, you'll see some packaging which incorporates the PB circle with a line through it, which further denotes that it's a no lead product. Again, the consistency with this is inconsistency. You're going to find valve marking per manufacturer. There's no set protocol for how it's marked as it relates to no lead or compliant product. So each and every manufacturer would have to be reviewed independently to ensure that you are in fact purchasing a no lead product. I want to spend a moment preparing for the law. Legend in particular, as far as for preparation for this is concerned, it's been a very challenging aspect of what we do. And I thought I would just do a little side note here about what our customers are dealing with abroad, and for that matter, everybody that's a part of the consortium. Basic inventory management principles outline that roughly 20% of your SKUs represent 80% of your overall sales. And the question is, what of those items, in particular the high velocity items, represent products that are utilized for potable? Or for that matter, the 80% that would consist of these slower moving or lower velocity items, those being more challenging to move through the supply chain, what percentage of my inventory is tied directly to those? Each and every day that we move closer to January 4th, 2014, it's critical to recognize that it's one day fewer that you have to move product through the supply chain. Keep in mind the education behind this, all the way down and through the customers that you sell to each and every day, is a critical element to having the product move through the supply chain and installed before the January 4th deadline. And again, no product that doesn't meet the 0.25% of lead or lower can be installed after January 14th. So there is the critical date that we're working against. And inventory management would tell you that there are items that are high velocity that potentially will not be a problem moving through the supply chain. There are lower velocity items where you may have a supply currently that would carry you beyond that of 2013 and put you in the red as it relates to your ability to market that product or sell it after the deadline. So be cognizant. My recommendation is review every single potable product in your businesses and review them on an individualized basis, meaning that each and every one of them has to be considered as to where you're at currently with inventory levels and where you're potentially going to be at by the end of this year. First on the list of preparation or agenda for distributors will be this. Develop an action plan. Many of the companies that are supporting the consortium have had action plans in place for many years. We've been doing our very best to educate and inform our distributor base. Reach out to colleagues in states that already had the changeover. Many of these colleagues that have gone through this, whether it be California, Vermont, Maryland, Louisiana, they've dealt with this. Your friendly associations with customers abroad may be able to help you in this degree. Communicate with all affected vendors. Understand the law, i.e. potable versus non-potable. Again, we've spent some time, and again, the definition has a long way to go as far as outlining and spelling out specifically in detail, but right now we can walk away with the words anticipated human consumption or keys. Assess inventory positions and begin to decrement non-compliant product, moving it out. Lean on the knowledge base of the manufacturers. We're here to support you, and that can be in the form of training or just counsel with our technical and engineering departments. Educate employees so they understand the impact and can be a resource for their customers. Remember, the individuals in your companies that are on the front lines each and every day are engaged with those that are installing the product. The knowledge base that we have has to reach those that are in the field in the areas of direct customer communication. It's critical. Communicate with customers early and often. State the conversation today, gauge their knowledge, and explain the law, and expire existing bids. Part of that could be expiring existing bids would be a critical component. In addition to that, you may find yourself quoting product as non-compliant, compliant, and thirdly, many manufacturers may currently be undertaking a rolling change, meaning that as they sell their non-compliant product off, and if that happens before January 4, 2014, they won't replace it with non-compliant, meaning that you could find in midstream your current vendors offering both non-compliant product, and when you order non-compliant, only having lead-free to fill that particular order. So keep that in mind, whether it's quoting with a non-compliant, a compliant, and covering all the bases, noting that possible exceptions could come into play as it relates to non-compliant product being not available for the balance of this year. Just a brief summary with the contractors and just a little ad-lib here to give you an idea. I recently did a PHCC training class for the Master Plumber Association of Philadelphia, and I can strongly tell you that there wasn't one of those particular firms, which were all professionally run and managed, that was completely understanding of the new law. And it led to a very difficult conversation as it relates to their bidding. What are they going to do with current materials they have on stock in hand? And what about the manufacturers that are no longer taking product back because they have no outlet to sell the product? We're all in this together. It would be unreasonable to think that each and every one of us won't suffer a little bit as we move through this process. But these are things that the areas that the contractors need to be brought to their attention. Advise them to start planning now. They have the same hurdles that you have if they're carrying inventory for jobs. Sit down, explain the federal law and any state laws that will affect you, and now knowing that the effective dates are ultimately going to impact them. Know what product categories are included, and I'm reading this because it's really geared to a contractor, so I'm tweaking it slightly so that everybody understands where I'm going with it. Know what product categories are included in and exempt from the applicable laws. Have them learn how to identify lead-free product markings and packaging. Confirm manufacturer listing with third-party agencies. Be sure you stock products that meet the new standards. Maybe stock with non-compliant, non-saleable inventory on 1/4/2014, and practice proper installation and soldering techniques for lead-free products. Work with suppliers to obtain installation material recommendations and training. It's critical that we get to these the contracting firms, that they understand what they're faced with. The last thing any one of our distributor partners want is to see our customer base ultimately at the end of this year bringing back non-compliant product for credit, when in fact they have manufacturers that are currently not going to take that product back. So the education that happens now will save much in the way of cost and possibly damage relationships later this year. Chris, before I pass this back to you, I've tailored this presentation, or at least taken a number of the slides out to make it webinar friendly, keeping it at 30 minutes. We've also taken much of it out to really focus on the key matters at hand, which are the law, the products that are directly going to be affected, the exemptions, covering the concerns of the distributor and the contractor as it relates to materials they currently have on hand. But we'd like to, I've addressed this in a way that it summarizes the key points of interest for those on this webinar. Chris, we are welcome and open to any questions.
I'm looking in the chat box, and I don't see any questions. If everyone does have questions, or if anyone does, I would encourage them to use the toolbar on the right side. It'd be the easiest way to handle these questions. But you know what? I'm looking at our attendee list, and we have a relatively few number of people that are actually on this webinar, so I thought I would unmute people, but apparently that's not going to work very well. Got too many people in different situations. So if anyone does have questions, please go ahead and post them in the chat box or the questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel. Any questions? I know some people may be typing. One of the things that I'll say, just to give it a few more minutes, is that Dan Hilton, our Director of Government Affairs, is actively working to help ASA advance an amendment to the law, and that is to change the legislation such that it's no longer a date of sale of January 4th, 2014, but date of manufacturer. And it is a long shot, but we've been fortunate that we've had Dan on the Hill for a couple years on a full-time basis. And so far as I know, ASA is the only organization working to try to change the law. How soon that will take place, we don't know. And ideally, sooner than later would be for our hope. But this is something that we will continue to try to do for our members. There's a lot of precedence for it, both within our industry and outside of the industry, and other with respect to other components and ingredients, so to speak, to other products. So, Dan, that's one way Dan continues to work on our behalf every day on what is a critical issue for all of us. Any questions? I know Jason Graham, Ryan Best, my panel is showing me that in Brian Harrigan, it's showing me that you have a question. It's directing me to the question pane, but I don't see anything there. Oh, here we go. John, can you and Phil see the questions on your end? Hello? Somebody's asking if we can get a copy of the PowerPoint. The answer is yes. It will be available within the next 48 hours. We'll provide everybody that's on the webinar with a link to that information. Another question is, does anyone know how the EPA will work through each individual state in order to monitor and regulate local enforcement? John, it would seem that you're muted. Everyone, we're having a slight technical difficulty here. John, if you can hear me, please enter 10 pound on your phone. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read off these questions, and we will get an answer to the questions for everyone and send that out to you. The first question is, will the PowerPoint slides be available? The answer is yes. We will make them available. The second question is, does anyone know how the EPA will work through each individual state in order to monitor and regulate local enforcement? The next question is, how will we handle jobs that are quoted per spec in 2013 but run into 2014? Take domestic water heaters, for example.
Gentlemen, I'm back on now.
Okay. John, were you able to hear the questions? John, oh, he muted himself again. We've recorded the questions. We will make sure that we get the answers to you. At this point, I'm going to thank John for an excellent presentation and thank all of you for participating in today's webinar about the Reduction of Lead in Drinking Water Act. Again, this webinar has been recorded for replay, and all of you will receive a follow-up email message with notification as to when the replay is available, as well as instructions on how to access it and the presentation slides. Lastly, please mark your calendars to participate in ASA's next webinar scheduled to begin at 11 o'clock Eastern on this Thursday morning, April 11th. Our economist, Alan Bolio, with Industry Trends Research, will provide ASA members with his look at macroeconomic and regional environments, and specifically how they affect ASA members. Key industry trends, interest rates, areas of concern, and where opportunities can be found will also be discussed. There will be ample opportunity for Q&A and for learning how each company can incorporate rate of change into their planning process. Please contact Ledelia Berger in the ASA office at lberger, L-B-E-R-G-E-R, at asa.net to register. I'm Chris Murin, Executive Director of ASA, and this webinar is now concluded. Good morning.